Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 33 of It's Murder Up North. Thank you to Callum O'Neill for suggesting today's case. In your message you spoke fondly of your memories of Sadie Hartley and how much she was loved by the community. You described her as a wonderful and caring person who was willing to go out of her way for anyone. It is a case I was aware of as it received a lot of media coverage at the time and had occurred close to my hometown, but your passionate description regarding Sadie encouraged me to look closer into her murder, and I only hope I do her memory justice. I'm always happy to hear suggestions for future episodes, and you can contact me via Facebook or Twitter. Thank you to everyone who has left a review on Apple Podcast. It is lovely to read your comments on the show. And as always, thank you to my Patreon members for your continued support. If you would like to become a member and have access to early episode releases and other exclusive content, please visit Patreon/It's Murder Up North. My podcast of the week is Always Time for True Crime, hosted by the wonderful and supportive Julia. She definitely deserves a listen. Here's a quick peek of her show.
Hey guys, this is Julia from Always Time for True Crime. Every week, I get into a new case about murder, missing persons, and serial killers. My podcast is all about the lesser-known cases. So, if you're looking for something beyond Ted Bundy or JonBenet Ramsey, head on over to Always Time for True Crime for some new true crime stories. You can listen to Always Time for True Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Stitcher, and more.
Now, let's head to the episode. Pulling up outside the Greystone detached house, the officers climbed out of the car and glanced around them. Stillness lingered over them, and a chill clung in the winter air as frost glistened upon the ground. Making their way down the driveway, they approached the dark brown front door and awaited a response to their knocking. After a few moments waiting, the pair glanced around the exterior of the property, looking for any signs of movement inside, but no curtains twitched. No light had begun to illuminate any of the rooms. Knocking once more, one of the officers peered through the glass side panel. Beyond lay a wide, dimly lit hallway, and roughly 10 feet away from the front door, the motionless figure of a woman could be seen lying upon the floor. Hastily, the officers smashed the side panel in order to unlock the door. Stepping over the threshold, they were confronted with a sight that would haunt them. The body of a woman lay in a pool of blood, and it was clear that she had been the victim of a vicious attack, which had left her unrecognisable. The police already knew her identity. She was Sadie Hartley, and earlier that morning one of her employees had requested a welfare check be done, as they had not been able to contact the 60-year-old. The investigation into Sadie's murder was quickly begun, as the police set out to discover who had taken her life and why. They began by looking into her background. Born Sadie Catherine Cook, the third of 7 children, her siblings described their childhood as a happy one, and they all shared a close bond. Her early years were spent in a 3-bedroom council house in Newark, Nottinghamshire. Sadie's father worked hard to provide for his family, spending days away from home as a long-distance lorry driver, while her mother tended to the house and children. The family didn't have a lot in terms of luxuries, but their parents ensured the children had everything they needed. Each year they would set aside some money so they could go on a day trip to Skegness at Christmas time. Her siblings fondly remember these trips, recalling building sandcastles and splashing in the waves before heading to the fun fair. Sadie proved herself to be a driven and hard-working individual, and after leaving school, she went on to study for a degree in microbiology and microchemistry in Brighton. following which the ambitious young woman secured a job at Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals, where she excelled, proving she was fully capable of working in various roles from sales, marketing, and working as part of the medical team. She would help run clinical trials. While at the company, Sadie also worked on products that had the potential to help those suffering from leukemia and lymphoma. Julie Taylor, who became Sadie's best friend, stated that Sadie was, quote, a very driven lady. Within her work, she had very little breaks and worked for the one company. She had a very big role. Most people working within the pharmaceutical industry have a passion for it. Sadie had a drive for it. She took very little time off for maternity leave. She couldn't wait to get back to work. That was Sadie. She had that desire to make a better place. The friends would later move on to start their own business, called Hartley Taylor Communications, which they had successfully run for 16 years. Sadie's older brother Graham stated that she became, quote, quite wealthy and was able to afford things she never dreamt of as a child. But Sadie never changed from that little sister I grew up with so many years ago. Sadie was nurtured in a close, loving, caring and supportive family. She went on to lead a full and successful life. She had 2 wonderful children, who she loved to bits, end quote. Sadie's private life revolved around her family and her hobbies. Her daughter Charlotte described her mum's various interests, quote, she had a massive passion for horses. She always went off on trips by herself to different countries, doing long treks over a number of days. She also enjoyed skiing, anything outdoors, walking, being with her friends, socialising, and loved a good party as well. She's rode through Marrakesh, Chile and Argentina, which was coast to coast, about 2 weeks long. Just really nice exotic places. She went skiing once a year, or sometimes up to 3 times a year, and we've skied with her since we were children. As a family going together, it was brilliant, end quote. Following the murder, Charlotte recalled the moment she learned of her mother's death. Quote, I was in Hawaii on the holiday of a lifetime with my partner and his parents. We'd been away for about 10 days when I got the phone call, and I was in my hotel room. It was about 4 a.m. It was one of the family liaison officers who called, and it was my partner who heard the news. He really struggled to tell me, so I had to speak to the officer on the phone. You don't know almost what to say. I couldn't believe it. I had just got engaged about 3 days before I got the phone call, so I was from an incredible high to an incredible low. It was just indescribable. You never think it will happen to you. At that moment in time, all I wanted to do was go back home, but I knew she wasn't going to be there when I got back. In 2002, Sadie met Ian Johnston, a former firefighter who shared her keen interest in skiing. They had begun a casual relationship, but over the years it blossomed. The couple would go on trips abroad, spending 22 days travelling in Ecuador and skiing in France. By 2014, the couple were living together in Sadie's 5-bedroom detached house on Sunnybank Road, in the sleepy village of Helmshire, which sits roughly 18 miles north of Manchester. It was apparent to police that Sadie was an intelligent, hard-working individual who was well-liked and respected by everyone who knew her. The successful businesswoman had no enemies. In fact, she was described by her daughter as being someone who would deal with any disagreements in a calm and level-headed manner, preferring to tackle things by talking through them. There was no clear motive for the crime. Sadie was a well-loved member of the community. Her home was immaculate, with no signs that a robbery had occurred. Investigators speculated that she had opened her front door to the killer, due to the absence of any forced entry, and the position of her body suggested the mother of 2 had been attacked almost as soon as she'd opened the door. The true brutality of the attack was revealed during the post-mortem, which was carried out by Dr. Lum. He reported that she had suffered more than 51 injuries. These consisted of wounds to the face, head, neck, chest, back, arms and right leg. Some were up to 20 centimetres deep, including one that penetrated her liver. Her face had been disfigured, with one blow striking one side of her face and exiting the other, and another to the neck which severed a major artery. Dr. Lum continued, quote, "Her tongue and spinal column was also cut by the blade, and the tip had penetrated her right eye. There were further injuries to both hands and arms, with the blade going right through her right thumb and right arm, typical defensive wounds from fighting off a knife attacker." End quote. Senior Investigating Officer Paul Withers from Lancashire Police called it, quote, "a frenzied attack. Sadie suffered absolutely appalling injuries, and I would suggest very quickly lost her fight for life." During the coroner's examination, a key piece of evidence was discovered which helped police build a clearer picture of the events that night. They found the broken prong of a stun gun embedded in the fabric neckline of Sadie's jumper, which was evidence that the stun gun had been pressed against the left side of Miss Hartley's head. In any murder investigation, it is procedure for the police to look at those closest to the victim first, as it is sadly often the case that a crime as vicious as this is perpetrated by someone who knew the victim. Police turned their attention to Sadie's partner, Ian Johnston. He was absent the night she had been murdered, and so police needed to get an alibi, and he had an airtight one. He had been in Switzerland for the last 10 days, and Sadie had been due to join him a couple of days after her murder. Police made a public appeal for information, addressing the press, quote, "Sadie is last known to have made contact with a work colleague at around 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, January the 14th, but was not heard from since." At around 8 p.m. on that night, an old-style Renault Clio car is seen on CCTV driving into Sunnybank Road, and driving off again around a minute later. Officers want to trace this car. Was this your vehicle? Were you driving the car? Around the same time, a man is seen walking out of the cul-de-sac and in the general direction of the village store. We need to trace this man, as he may have vital information about what happened to Sadie. This man is seen to pass another person walking in the opposite direction into the cul-de-sac. We need to speak to these people as soon as possible. Officers fought to trace the Renault Clio, which was in the area at the time of the murder and had been identified as a suspicious vehicle. It was seen driving up the cul-de-sac and then returning shortly afterwards, making police question whether the occupants had been checking that Sadie was at home. The car had come to officers' attention as it seemed out of place on a street of £500,000 houses and luxury cars. They considered that it was possibly a takeaway driver, or a potential witness, or possibly the killer. Approximately 4 minutes after the Clio had passed the camera, a person is seen walking on the opposite side of the road. They appear to have their left hand in their pocket, as though they are trying to conceal something. As investigators worked various leads, Ian cooperated with the police as best he could, providing them with any information regarding Sadie. He advised that the 60-year-old had been nervous about being home alone since her home was burgled in August the previous year. He told investigators this was the first time she had been on her own since the break-in. He also recalled an incident that occurred on the 7th of January, the week prior to the murder, telling police it had left Sadie quite shaken up and fearful. Sadie had sent an email to her friend regarding what happened. It read, quote, "Had a knock on the door just after 9 last night. Thought twice about opening it, but did. It was a woman with a bunch of chrysanthemums in her hand, the sort you'd pick up at a garage for a couple of quid, and said, 'Mrs. Hartley, these are for you.' But when I asked who they were from, she said she'd forgotten the name, and then disappeared down the drive. No label or anything on them. Bit creepy, really. Not from Ian, of course, but no idea who would do something like that. Needless to say, I had a bad night's sleep last night as a result." End quote. Ian also mentioned the name of a woman who he felt the police should look into. She was 35-year-old Sarah Williams, his ex-partner. The pair had met in December 2012, while he was working as a ski instructor at the Chill Factor indoor skiing facility in Manchester. He proceeded to explain how their relationship quickly developed into a sexual affair, which was conducted while he was also seeing Sadie. By the spring of 2013, Ian claimed that when he tried to break up with Sarah Williams, the scorned woman became possessive and would not accept that he wanted to leave her. The relationship clearly continued, however, because during his trip to Ecuador with Sadie, he was still communicating with Williams via text, and upon returning home, he and Sarah had sex. Williams was attracted to older men. Ian Johnston was 20 years her senior. However, she was also seeing another man, a Mr. Hardwick, who was 40 years older than Williams, and had started a relationship with her when she was just 17 years old. Mr. Hardwick was a married man, and it is not clear the extent of his relationship with Sarah, save for the fact he provided for her financially. In December 2013, Sarah and Mr. Hardwick went skiing in France, where they checked into the same hotel as Ian and Sadie. It would be 2 years before Sadie would learn of Ian's betrayal, and it was delivered by Sarah Williams in a letter which described in detail the affair. In September 2014, Sadie held the letter, her hand shaking as she read every poisonous word. Quote, "Dear Sadie, I think you should know that Ian has been cheating on you for over a year. He's been having an affair with me. By his own admission, Ian's not in love with you. Never has been and never will be. The lack of any form of chemistry or spark between you has been mentioned several times by different people, who have no vested interest in either of you. Make no mistake about it, Ian knows that you are buying him, and so does everyone else. He has said this himself by his own entirely free admission. Right now he is letting you do it because it suits him to do so, while he does what he wants behind your back. We have been sleeping together, and everything else that goes with it, week in and week out for some considerable time now. Have a look around the house. There's plenty of my things around the place. Has he even changed the sheets since we were last in there? There has been more lying, deceit, and sneaking around than you would ever think. The sex is unbelievably fantastic, the best he's ever had, by a really, really long way. We have never been able to get enough of each other. It satisfied a need in him he will never really be able to suppress or manage without. Ian is stressed out and extremely depressed. His mental state is somewhat of a serious concern to me, hence why I'm writing this. I feel you have played a significant part in getting him in the state he's in now, which appears to be worsening by the day. Ian explained some time ago that you are extremely ruthless in business and will do whatever it takes to get what you want. He explained that you would trample over people and their family to realise your goals. He also explained that he felt you treat your personal relationships like a business. That would certainly appear to be true regarding him. From my perspective, it appears that you decided that you were going to trap him in whatever way necessary. You have put him under huge financial pressure due to your wildly different, desired standards of living. I appreciate that you have more than enough money to pay for whatever you do. However, Ian is a proud man who is not happy to be bought by you. He is aware that you are buying him and feels that this is the only way of coping financially, which is certainly not the case. You appear to be doing everything possible to perpetuate this. Why have you done this to him? Surely you would be far better off with someone who is your financial equal and at least wants to be with you, rather than someone you had to buy who is sleeping with someone else. You booked a holiday to the Galapagos Islands, which was way, way out of his budget. I know that you paid for it, but he was massively uncomfortable with it and felt the financial disparity was far too great. He wanted to leave you before going to the Galapagos Islands, but felt unable to do so due to how guilty he felt because of the money you had spent on it. Whilst he unsurprisingly enjoyed the holiday, he utilised every opportunity to get in touch with me and was back in bed with me as soon as he walked through his front door. He literally couldn't get back to my house fast enough. Any hopes of escaping from you were further diminished when shortly after returning from the Galapagos, you set about recruiting his daughter Hannah. It's fairly appalling to know that Ian felt that he was totally trapped because leaving you might then jeopardise Hannah's future. You're using his daughter to blackmail him and make sure he stays where you want. You did a good job of backing him into a corner where he felt more and more trapped by the situation. His only daughter is now dependent on you. Despite doing everything you have done so far to buy him and trap him, he's still lying to you, cheating and sleeping with me behind your back. Maybe it is about time that somebody told you. Probably it just goes to show you can buy and trap someone with money and blackmail, but can't make them love you or be faithful to you. Should you choose to talk to him about this, bear in mind it was not a one-off, an accident or a mistake, or any other form of excuse. This was a choice made freely, over and over and over again, for now more than 12 months, because it was what he wanted to do. Clearly these are not the actions of someone with any respect, desire, love or affection for you whatsoever." End quote. Despite having never met Sadie, it is clear from her letter that Sarah had formed a resentment towards the woman Ian had left her for. Reading this letter, I got the sense of a woman who is extremely jealous and possibly intimidated by the 60-year-old businesswoman, who is financially secure and able to provide Ian with a lifestyle that Sarah could only dream of. What baffled police was the fact that this letter had been sent 18 months prior to the murder, which made it difficult to consider that the breakup would have been the motive for Sadie's murder. However, given Ian's description of Sarah as an obsessive individual and his confession that the affair had continued, Sarah Williams seemed a more likely suspect. Just 3 days after the murder, on January the 17th, 2016, the police conducted a dawn raid at the terraced house of Sarah Williams and arrested the 35-year-old on suspicion of murder. When taken into custody, she seemed unfazed by the whole situation, despite the charges against her. When taken into the interview room, she continued to display a relaxed demeanour. But the investigators had been working hard to gather evidence relating to Sarah's involvement. Conducting the interview, Detective Brian A. Midgley asked Sarah to recall her whereabouts on the night of the murder, to which she replied she had been in bed sick. Her text messages to her partner David seemed to corroborate her story. During the interview, Sarah talked about her breakup with Ian in August 2014. She claimed he, quote, felt she was too clingy, too needy. She went on to admit to sending Sadie the letter and advised that Sadie had called her and had been very angry. Sarah continued by stating that Ian wasn't happy that she had told Sadie about the relationship, recalling that her actions caused an explosive argument between herself and Ian. When asked if she was jealous of Sadie, the 35-year-old replied, quote, "No, 'cause the way I saw it, you know he's quite happy to spend 12 months cheating on her and messing her about and talking about leaving. That's not something to be jealous of. I didn't see they had like a great relationship." As Sarah Williams remained in custody, police continued their investigations. Reviewing Sarah's alibi, they discovered CCTV footage from a house near her home, capturing Sarah walking along her street on the night of the 14th of January, which contradicted her claims she was ill in bed. Her phone records placed her in the area of Helmshaw on both the day of the flower delivery and on the night of the murder. Sarah was asked to explain why her phone showed her being in the vicinity of Sadie's home, and Sarah claimed that she was sat outside Ian's house, apparently unaware that he no longer lived there, but she would make regular trips to where they shared many happy memories. However, more surveillance footage from the day of the flower delivery called into question this claim. Unfortunately, the image was too grainy to positively identify Sarah, but it did reveal that she may have had help, as 2 figures were captured on the camera. Police considered the possibility that Sarah wanted to confirm Sadie's address by concocting a plan to deliver flowers to the house. They considered that Sarah may have been concerned that she could be recognised and had sought the assistance of an associate. Further footage from a local supermarket showed Sarah with another person going to purchase the flowers, so investigators turned their attention to who this acquaintance was. They knew that a silver Vauxhall Astra had been seen on Sunnybank Road on the 7th of January. At the same time, the flowers were delivered, and witnesses had recalled seeing two occupants. The driver was a bald-headed male, while the other was a brunette woman. These descriptions matched the footage from the supermarket. However, they contradicted Sadie's email that stated that a woman had delivered the flowers. It was during door-to-door inquiries that the investigators got an answer to this contradiction. They noticed a house which had a silver Astra parked on the driveway. When the occupant answered the door, they were wearing a baseball cap identical to the one worn by the person seen with Sarah in the supermarket. As the officers entered the house, the homeowner, who had tattoos on both their arms, removed their hat, revealing an almost bald head with a number of clumps of longer hair. The woman explained to the police that she suffered from alopecia, which causes hair loss, and as such she never left the house without a hat. She identified herself as 56-year-old Katrina Walsh, and following further discussions with the woman, officers decided to bring her in for questioning regarding her involvement in the murder. Unlike Sarah, Katrina's demeanour while being booked into custody was that of a woman who was nervous and frightened. She was asked if she understood why she had been arrested, to which Katrina replied, quote, "I understand why, but I don't recall, because I have a memory problem. If I don't write things down, I forget them within 3 sleeps." She continues to advise the custody sergeant that she was worried that Sarah had committed a murder, but because of her bad memory, she didn't know for certain. She concluded by stating that she couldn't remember if she had been involved. As the evidence began to mount against Sarah, her next few interviews consisted of no-comment answers. But it wouldn't matter, as it was the questioning of Katrina that helped break the case, as she would be the source of key information that would prove damning to Sarah's claims of innocence. Katrina claimed that she was terrified of Sarah, and that she may have made her do something and she can't remember. Katrina showed police a picture she had taken on her phone of a note from her diary, which she claimed she had subsequently flushed down the toilet. She proceeded to tell officers that she didn't know what the note meant. It read, quote, "If it all goes up, safe by the stream to the southwest of Zephyr's field and high above the Soule." Having ascertained that Zephyr was Katrina's horse, she was taken to the stables where her horse was kept. It was a large facility, with roughly 58 stables and 12 fields. Katrina had advised police that Sarah had given her some bags and asked her to destroy the contents. She confessed to hiding a zapper, a knife, the soles of some boots, and destroying clothing and towels. She took them to an area at the top of Zephyr's paddock, where the undergrowth was thick and trees marked the boundary. Beyond this, the ground sloped towards a stream, where Katrina pointed out a couple of piles of horse manure, under which police discovered the items she had concealed. Upon recovering all the items, police formally charged Sarah Williams with the murder of Sadie Hartley. During the search of Katrina's property, they uncovered evidence that suggested she was also complicit in the crime, and upon this, she was also charged with murder. When the case came to court on July 5, 2016, the full extent of the planning that had gone into the orchestrating the crime was revealed, a plot that was hatched 18 months earlier. The evidence that had been amassed against the two suspects was compelling. The most damning evidence came from Katrina Walsh, whose diary entries gave details of how the plot evolved. Her first entry in September 2014 was made around the time Sarah had sent Sadie the letter regarding the affair. The entry read, quote, "Sarah came round, so got caught up in endless murder plots for Ian's other half." Her next entry was 9 months later, in June 2015, a month after Ian and Sarah had rekindled their relationship, and phone activity showed intimate messages were exchanged. Katrina wrote, quote, "We're also seriously talking of getting rid of her opponent. I agree it's probably a good play. She does seem to be a totally evil bitch." In August 2015, Sarah wished to recruit Kevin, who was Katrina's ex-husband. He recalled receiving a text message from his estranged wife, attempting to arrange for him to meet with Sarah. He then received a phone call from Sarah with a proposal for a job suiting his, quote, particular skills, referring to his archery skills gained from Viking reenactments. Kevin stated he was uneasy with the idea, especially when Sarah insisted on meeting in public. He stated, quote, alarm bells were going off in my head. Whatever she wanted was something dodgy. After the conversation, I thought, hang on, I have never trusted this girl. Just walk away now. I told Kate, and she replied, saying, yes, knowing Sarah, it will be something nefarious. Katrina's diary entries corroborated Kevin's statement, quote, a lot of texts from Sarah. Kev's not going for the idea of being a hitman after all. Scuppered that idea. Plan B will be needed. She continued, stating, wow, I may get to be instrumental in helping remove the awful woman. This may happen, wow. I'm unexpectedly excited by it. Was so buzzing so much I needed a southern comfort to wind down a bit. I have no moral qualms, just a serious don't let us get caught twinge. A year after the pair had first discussed the idea of murdering Sadie, they had begun to consider how they were going to carry it out. One diary entry showed that one idea was to make the crime look like an ISIS terror attack, which would throw the police off the scent, and another suggestion was to do a drive-by shooting on a motorbike. The diary entry read, quote, fortunately, Sarah's had an idea that would spare me the anxiety, as she thinks of just riding on a motorcycle, killing and leaving said floozy, and riding off. I just have to clandestinely train Sarah to ride a bike and store said bike. She later added, Sarah turned up, caught Hunted, a Channel 4 television show, then discussed plans for murder. The suspects seemed to have drawn inspiration from the Channel 4 series Hunted. The concept of the show consists of contestants who have to go on the run for 25 days, while being pursued by former and current detectives who have access to CCTV, automatic number plate recognition, social media, and phone tracing to help them hunt down the contestants. It was following the end of this series that Katrina made her next diary entry, quote, just buzzing, too much over the end of Hunted, and all the planning after. Sarah has ordered a GPS tracker on my credit card to be delivered here and will give me cash for it. That's fine, as I'm not going to be involved at the sharp end. The GPS tracker was put into use on the 2nd of December 2015, when Sarah attended a Christmas party at the Chill Factor in Manchester, which was also attended by Ian and Sadie. Sarah took this opportunity to place the tracker on Ian's car, and subsequently used it to find out where Ian lived, later driving by the home he shared with Sadie several times with Katrina. A key piece of evidence presented to the court was the stun gun, which Katrina referred to as a zapper. It should have two metal prongs through which the electrical charge is distributed. However, the one police recovered was missing a prong, and they speculated that the missing one had been recovered from Sadie's jumper during the autopsy. The jury were told how the defendant acquired the stun gun, the ownership of which is illegal in the UK under the 1986 Firearms Act. On December the 9th, 2015, Sarah and Katrina caught a ferry from Hull and travelled to Germany to purchase the stun gun. This trip was captured on CCTV, and Katrina mentioned it in her diary, quote, I said no matter what her way of testing the bitch, she needs to test it to see what that zapper could do, or she could risk being injured herself. So we'll get a trip to Germany out of this. Took ages to wind down all the excitement of plotting the perfect murder. The vendor who sold them the stun gun stated that the pair initially wanted to purchase a more powerful model. However, due to it being out of stock, they settled on a 500,000 volts model instead. The defendants then returned to the UK via ferry with the gun. Further evidence of the preparation was revealed in text messages and purchases made by the defendants in the weeks prior to the murder. On the 4th of January, Sarah sent Katrina a text stating, quote, don't forget to crack on with your shopping. Suddenly it's time. The following day, Katrina then went to a supermarket and purchased the knife, using her store card, which enabled the police to track the purchase. While Katrina is acquiring the murder weapon, Sarah heads to Sunnybank Road and removes the GPS tracker from Ian's car. She then purchases a pair of binoculars before heading to Sadie's workplace, where she watches the property for 2 hours. It was then revealed how the pair had visited Sadie's home on the 7th of January to deliver the £3 bunch of supermarket flowers, which the prosecution argued was a ploy to ensure they would be going to the correct property. In the following days, the pair purchased the second-hand Renault Clio, and they were able to link Sarah to the purchase through text messages found on a mobile phone she had concealed under her bed. The phone showed exchanges between Sarah and the person selling the vehicle, which she paid for with cash. The automatic number plate recognition system did not pick up on the Clio, as black tape had been used to alter the numbers, which meant that the car was showing as a Toyota Yaris. Yet when police were able to obtain an image of the plate on the actual car, they were then able to trace the vehicle's movements, leading them to find the car abandoned over 50 miles away. When the vehicle was examined by forensic officers, they discovered blood that had soaked into the seats, which was confirmed to belong to Sadie Hartley. Further purchases made by the pair in the days leading up to the murder included a pair of boots, which were larger than Sarah's actual size, and some clothing. Katrina is also seen on surveillance camera at a petrol station, filling up her car, possibly in preparation for picking up Sarah after the murder. The details of Sarah and Katrina's movements on the day of the murder were explained to the court, beginning with a call placed on the phone Sarah had concealed under her bed. It only lasted for 14 seconds and was to Sarah's employers. At 3 p.m. on the 14th of January, Sarah makes 2 calls, one to David, her boyfriend, advising him that she isn't feeling well and is leaving work early. The second call was made to Sadie's workplace, possibly checking to see if Sadie was still there. This is followed by a message to David at 5:58 p.m, which read, quote, "Just had another cup of tea, going to switch light off and have a nap now. We'll ring when I wake up, as long as it's not late." By 7:15, Sadie is seen on her neighbour's CCTV returning home. Approximately half an hour later, the Renault Clio drives down to the end of the cul-de-sac and back, before parking up at the entrance to the street. Moments later, a solitary figure is seen walking towards Sadie's home. Police speculated that this was Sarah Williams. At 8 p.m, 60-year-old Sadie Hartley, alone in her house, opened her front door to find Sarah Williams standing on her doorstep. The fact that Sadie was found roughly 10 feet away from the door suggests that she may have invited Sarah in to talk, and when she turned her back, Sarah attacked her with the stun gun, then proceeded to viciously attack Sadie, inflicting over 50 wounds. Incredibly, just 4 minutes later, Sarah Williams is seen by the camera, calmly making her way back to the Renault Clio, seemingly unfazed by what she had just done. It is then suggested that she drove to a predetermined meeting place in Elmsmere Port, where she met Katrina, who was waiting in her Vauxhall Astra. It is suspected that Sarah gave Katrina the items to destroy at this point. Abandoning the vehicle in Elmsmere Port, the defendants returned to their homes. Katrina proceeded to destroy and hide the evidence as requested, while Sarah cleaned her property with bleach. But when police searched her house, they discovered she hadn't been thorough enough, and they found blood spots in the bathroom which contained Sadie's DNA. One of the key aspects of the 7-week trial was the affair between Sarah Williams and Ian Johnston, which the prosecution argued was what motivated the defendant to commit the crime, in a delusional belief that with Sadie dead, Ian would be hers. Referencing the skiing trip to France, where Ian and Sarah were staying in the same hotel as their significant others, Gordon Cole, QC, defending Williams, asked Mr. Johnson, quote, "Were you and Sarah playing footsie under the table?" To which Ian replied, "No, electronic flirting." Mr. Cole quoted a text from Williams to Ian, which said, "Loved foot cuddling with you under the table last night." This forced Ian to concede, quote, "I stand corrected. At the time, I was not in a relationship with Sadie. I was away with Sadie. I had not made any commitments." Ian Johnston continued by claiming that his relationship with Sarah Williams was, quote, "purely sex at that stage." He then stated that Sarah became clingy and controlling, but advised that when he tried to break it off with her, quote, "She would keep turning up at my house unannounced. I wasn't very happy with her turning up, and I would tell her so." Despite moving in with Sadie, Johnston continued his affair with Sarah, whom he described as his bit on the side, and phone records revealed that the pair had been communicating just 10 days before the murder, with at least 30 messages between them. When Sarah was questioned about the relationship with Ian Johnston, she openly admitted that despite him ending the relationship, she found herself obsessed with him, and that is why she sent the letter, hoping that Sadie would end the relationship and Ian would want to be with Sarah. She then confessed, quote, "It was a crap thing to do." However, it was revealed that Sarah had done the same thing in a previous relationship with the married man called Summerpat Sitiwijana. First, Sarah visited his wife and told her of the affair. Then, a couple of weeks later, the wife received a letter stating, quote, "I think you should know about the sort of scumbag you were married to." To further manipulate the situation, Sarah claimed that Summerpat was the father of her unborn child, and she had included an ultrasound image as proof. A photo she would reveal in court was in fact her friend's child. It was also revealed that when the relationship between Summerpat and Sarah ended, Katrina, apparently at the request of Sarah, squirted filler foam into the exhaust of Summerpat's car. The focus then turned to the characters of the defendants. Katrina Walsh was described as being intelligent, artistic and eccentric, with limited social skills, who seemed to be infatuated with the girl who was 20 years her junior. While in police custody, her behaviour was deemed to be bizarre. Officers stated she tried to appear spaced out and was, quote, "the caricature of a fool." Concerned that she may have mental health issues and the fact she claimed she suffered with memory loss, a designated adult was assigned to sit in interviews with her. However, upon psychological assessment, it was claimed it was all just an act. With regards to her friendship with Sarah Williams, it was explained that the pair had met when 32-year-old Katrina taught horse riding to 12-year-old Sarah. Over the years, they grew close, supporting each other financially, going on holidays together and watching films at Katrina's house. In terms of Sarah Williams, she was portrayed as a jealous and obsessive individual, referred to as a bunny boiler. Her relationship with 75-year-old David was also brought to light, with her being described as a kept woman who was provided for by her sugar daddy. When she took to the stand to testify, Sarah told the jury that she had struggled with relationships with men since she was 13, when she claimed that while on her way home from a horse riding lesson, she was knocked off her bike by a man who proceeded to lock her in the boot of his car. The man took her to a house where he sexually assaulted her, before driving her over 30 miles away from her home and left her at the side of a motorway. She told police the details she could recall, including the fact that the man had a baby in the back seat of his blue car. Despite the story making national news and the police appealing for information, Sarah's attacker was never apprehended, leading to people who knew her to speculate that she had invented the story, with many describing her as a fantasist. However, when I looked into the story, there were reports of a second attack on a 16-year-old girl, which had a number of similarities to Sarah's story. Both girls were put into the boot of the blue car, and both girls reported that there was a blonde-headed child in the car. Incidentally, the murder of Sadie occurred a week and 21 years after Sarah's sexual assault. After a grueling 7-week trial, the jury returned from deliberations and found both Sarah and Katrina guilty of murder. Prior to summing up and passing sentence, a victim impact statement read on the behalf of Sadie's daughter Charlotte was delivered to the court. In the statement, Charlotte, who had been in Hawaii at the time of Sadie's murder, spoke about the last conversation she had had with her mother, and that he was to tell her that she had just gotten engaged. She recalled how happy and excited Sadie was about planning the wedding. The statement continued, quote, "The two women who murdered my mum plotted for months to do these things, and I don't know how a human being could do this to another human being. It's like living a nightmare. I will never be able to forget how frightened and scared my mum would have been that night in her home alone, where she is meant to be safe." In summing up, Justice Turner stated, quote, "Sarah Williams, over a period of about 18 months you plotted the murder of a woman whose only crime was to love the man you wanted for yourself. But let no one make the mistake of thinking that this was a crime of passion. It was a crime of obsession, of ignorance, of barbarity. But above all, it was a crime of pure evil. And over that period of 18 months of scheming, you found in Katrina Walsh both a fellow spirit and enthusiastic participant. You, Walsh, are every bit as morally degenerate as Williams. No wonder you have been best friends over so many years. He concluded, doubtless the features of secret agent-style intrigue carried with them elements of fantasy, but this was no harmless world of make-believe. It was a game of death. He then instructed that Sarah Williams was to serve a life sentence, with a minimum term of 30 years, while Katrina Walsh was sentenced to life, having to serve a minimum of 25 years before she would be eligible for parole. Outside the courthouse, Detective Superintendent Paul Withers delivered a statement to the press, quote, Katrina Walsh made reference in her diary to, I can't believe what we're doing. But she had many, many months and years to say no, this cannot happen, or to report it to the local police. This is not a momentary lapse in control, or loss of control. This is premeditated, this is planned, almost an assassination of a totally innocent lady. A lady in her 60s, who has never done anything wrong in her life, and loses her life in the most horrendous circumstances that I can imagine. Sarah Williams and Katrina Walsh are not the only people with a life sentence in respect of what happened, because Charlotte, Harry, Gary, Ian Johnson and the siblings of Sadie, I'm not sure will ever get over it. They have a very different life now. They have to try and get used to a new normality, which is incredibly difficult for them. Reflecting on who Sadie was, and the impact of her death, her family and friends released their own statements. Her daughter Charlotte said, quote, My mum was a very fun-loving person. She didn't judge anyone. She literally didn't have anything bad to say about anybody. I would like her to be remembered for just the inspiration that she was to many people. She just literally lit up a room. She was just perfect. There was nothing bad about her that anybody could say. She was just a lovely, trustworthy, kind, loving woman, and just cared about everybody. Sadie's partner and the man Sarah was having an affair with stated, no sentence imaginable could ever replace Sadie and everything she lived for. She was kind, loving, thoughtful, intelligent, and the best friend anyone could have. The brutal, evil, and cowardly attack perpetrated against this defenceless Sadie tore into our families, friends, and communities. There can be no forgiveness for such vile behaviour. With regards to his feelings regarding the affair, he stated, quote, Oh, I should have had more sense. The remorse I feel, the abject horror of what's happened, and the consequences of me meeting her, I just will regret that forever. Ian Johnson continued by explaining the implications of Sadie's death on his life, quote, There's been absolutely no contact with Sadie's family from the moment they found out she was dead. Okay, no contact. I found out I'm not in the will when the jurors asked a question, was I in the will? I've lost everything. This 8 months has just been the most horrendous. You just get a kicking every day and I want the kicking to stop. And I know it won't for a while. And if anybody wants to blame that on a few ridiculous bloody texts, then it's just outrageous. There was nothing I could do to foresee or stop this. I wasn't culpable in the death of Sadie. Understandably, Sadie's family have cut ties with Ian Johnston. He may not feel that his actions were what led to Sadie's murder. He ultimately betrayed her trust. He continued a relationship with a woman who would ultimately be responsible for the 60-year-old's death. Sadie's son Harry said, quote, Her death has left a huge void, and the last few months have been the hardest we could ever have imagined. Mum was a much-loved sister, aunt, friend to many. She was an inspiration to everyone around her, an adventurer who lit up the room. She was perfect. She's going to miss so many things in life, and was really looking forward to Charlotte and Rob's forthcoming wedding, and her future grandchildren. She will miss our birthdays, Christmases, and the many milestones we as a family will go through. Our lives will never be the same again. Thank you for joining me for episode 33. This case was unbelievable. It's hard to imagine how Sarah and Katrina planned and carried out such a brutal murder on a well-loved woman who had done nothing against them. Sarah is definitely a manipulative and obsessive individual, described by those around her as a fantasist, with clearly an unhealthy relationship with Katrina Walsh. Throughout her interactions with police, Katrina portrayed herself as someone who had a low IQ, was easily confused and manipulated. Her behaviour concerned investigators to the extent that Katrina received an assessment of her mental state, and she was deemed to be mentally capable without any diminished abilities. This was supported by her diary entries, which also contradicted this behaviour, as did statements made by people who knew her, who claimed that she was a highly intellectual woman who was socially awkward. However, if you watch the documentary called The Murder of Sadie Hartley, which was a key source for the episode and followed Lancashire police as they investigated the murder, Katrina's behaviour is unnerving and suggests she had some sort of diminished mental capacity. Either this was an Oscar-winning performance, or she was wrongly assessed. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on this case. Episode 34 will be available on Sunday. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.